It's a chilly Tuesday here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Geun in Seoul. Let's get started with a look at today's highlights. Korea's current account surplus shrank in October from the previous month, weighed by a record high deficit in its services account. While the U.S. is working toward drastically reducing its corporate tax rate, other advanced economies such as Japan, France, and Britain are also looking to do the same. Then what about Korea? We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. But first, the National Assembly will vote on the 2018 budget bill later today, 3 days after passing the legal deadline. The vote was initially expected to take place this morning, but has been delayed with the Finance Ministry still reviewing the proposal. On Monday, parties reached a tentative agreement over the budget bill after days of grueling talks to narrow their differences on key issues, such as the creation of public sector jobs and minimum wage-related subsidies. In order for the bill to pass, the ruling Democratic Party of Korea will need cooperation from the opposition because it doesn't have a majority in parliament. The main opposition Liberty Korea party said that despite the compromise, is still opposed to several contentious issues, with its lawmakers deciding to contest the budget deal in its current form. The Bank of Korea has released its preliminary data on the nation's current account for October, and it shows that the country's current account surplus fell sharply a month due to a drop in surplus in the goods account and an increased deficit in the services account. Our Kim Hae-sung with more.
South Korea's current account surplus in October only managed to hit $5.7 billion, less than half the $12.3 billion surplus recorded in September. Exports of goods fell to $44.4 billion from $54 billion, while goods imports dropped to $35.8 billion from $39 billion in the space of a month. The Bank of Korea attributed the drop to fewer working days in October due to the 10-day-long Chuseok harvest holiday. The service account deficit hit a record high of $3.5 billion in October, mainly due to a spike in the travel account deficit. During the Chuseok holiday, some 2.2 million Koreans traveled abroad, up nearly 20% on year, while the number of foreign visitors coming to the country slumped over 26% to 1.2 million. In particular, the number of Chinese tourists almost halved on year due to China's travel ban over South Korea's deployment of the U.S. THAAD anti-missile system. On year, however, exports and imports in October increased by 3% and 5.6% respectively, continuing their growth streak. Kim Hae-sung, Business Daily.
President Moon Jae-in attended a special ceremony this morning to mark the 54th Trade Day here in Korea. Moon praised Korea's economic recovery, including its total trade volume exceeding $1 trillion for the first time in 3 years. He stressed on the need to create more jobs through increased exports, emphasizing the role of SMEs in doing so, while pledging government support to help their cause. The president added the government aims to reform Korea's regulatory environment to boost R&D investment and called for more cooperation between SMEs and conglomerates. The United States has raised its anti-dumping tariffs on Korean steel products, bumping it up fourfold from the initial 10% to 40% in less than a month. According to industry sources, the U.S. Department of Commerce has revised upwards its preliminary duties on Korean steel rods to correct a calculation error. The Department of Commerce said it made a mistake in the process of calculating anti-dumping tariffs, failing to convert U.S. dollars to the Korean won for a key metric. The latest revision, which is expected to be a massive blow for Korean major exporters, comes amid talks on possible amendments to the Korea-U.S. FTA. The department will release a finalized version of its anti-dumping tariff review on January 1st of next year. With the Bank of Korea raising its benchmark interest rate for the first time in 6.5 years last week, Governor Lee Joo-yeol says it's time to adapt to a changing financial environment. The focus now is on how the higher rate will impact Korean households mired in a debt pile now totaling nearly $1.3 trillion. US dollars. Our Eunice Kim has this report.
It's time to adapt to a new reality in a post-low-rate world. Bank of Korea Governor Lee Ju-yeol reaffirmed the end of an era of easy money last week.
Whether borrowing, saving, or investing, it's time to become acquainted with a changing reality, different from the one we've known.
He added it was time to raise the key rate to 1.5% in order to stem the household borrowing run. Sealing the deal, the country's affirmed 3% annual growth rate forecast for this year, as well as forecasts that Korea was looking at breaking the $30,000 per capita GDP level next year. Although raising interest rates is an effective way to curb household debt, it also serves as a ticking time bomb for households struggling to keep up with interest payments. Danger lurks for vulnerable borrowers such as small business owners just getting by. High-risk households, that is, those with high principal repayment burden and more debt than assets, are already dealing with high rates in their non-bank institution loans. The higher the lending rate climbs in the short term, the more significant the number of high-risk households are expected to grow, up to 60,000 more in the case of an increase of 1.5 percentage point.
In particular, we believe it will be difficult for the marginal borrower, those already burdened with high principal repayment or those who are self-employed. I believe we need to offer these individuals financial support together with a policy prescription.
There are also concerns that the interest rate policy, coupled with a series of lending restrictions, could pour cold water on the country's economic recovery.
Already announced are real estate measures and policy to restrain new loans. In the case they collide, the housing market risks turning sluggish, making future construction investment difficult to become a drag on the economy.
The mission is a soft landing of Korea's household debt, now ticking past 1.4 quadrillion won, closing in on 1.3 trillion US dollars. Experts say the impact should be minimized by moderating the pace of future rate hikes with an eye on the overall economic reality. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
Korea's foreign exchange reserves rose in November for the third month in a row, reaching a new record high of $387.3 billion. Now the figure is $2.8 billion higher compared to October and exceeds the previous high set in August when it was tallied at $384.8 billion. The Bank of Korea said a significant portion of the gains were due to a weakening US dollar, which increased the value of assets denominated in non-dollar currencies. The US dollar fell 1.6% against the world's 6 major currencies last month. As of October, the country's total foreign exchange reserves was the 8th largest in the world. The U.S. Senate passed revisions to the country's tax code on Saturday, and the main thrust of the plan is clear: a major reduction in the corporate tax rate, which currently stands at 35%. And while other countries seem to be following suit, Korea is moving in the opposite direction by trying to raise its corporate tax rate. Let's take a closer look.
U.S. President Donald Trump believes corporate tax cuts can help boost overall growth.
It's the largest tax decrease in the history of our country by far. We're going to grow the country. We're going to grow jobs. We're going to be growing everything. We have companies now that are pouring back into our country even before this.
The U.S. House and Senate will need to compromise on final details as they near completion of the most significant rewrite of the U.S. tax code in over 30 years. And Washington is not the only one moving to cut corporate taxes, as Japan also announced that it's considering a tax break for businesses through various incentives. Under Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, the overall corporate tax rate has been slashed from 37% to 29.97% to make Japan more attractive for businesses. But back here in Korea, the government has raised the tax rate to 25%, and eyes are now on how the country's economy may be affected with other countries upping the ante and moving toward reducing corporate taxes.
And to tell us more about this, Professor Jung from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. Great to have you here.
Happy to be here.
So, although the plan is still subject to a revision, now the centerpiece of this existing legislation is the reduction in corporate taxes from the current 35% to 20%. Now, what can we make of this latest move by the United States?
Okay, well, this was part of the Republican campaign promise during the last election. President Trump promised that he would install plans, policies which would increase the growth rate to 4 to 5%, increase jobs, reduce trade deficit, and repatriate overseas profit that the American multinational firms have been keeping overseas. Now, so the centerpiece of the plan has been the reduction in corporate taxes, but there's a lot of question on whether this is warranted right now. Most neutral observers believe that this tax cut will increase the deficit for the United States as well as the national debt. And because they're so close to full employment right now, they don't know whether this new plan will actually add that many jobs. And further, because they have to pay for the corporate taxes, they do have to raise taxes elsewhere, and some of it seems to be falling on middle-class consumers. So we'll have to see how the revision works out and how the plan itself works out. I think most people are predicting that there will be an initial effect, expansionary effect, because the government is adding more money to the economy, but the medium-term and the longer-term results are not as clear.
Now, the United States is not the only country to be doing this. France and Britain have been eyeing cuts in their corporate taxes.
Right. The United Kingdom has reduced its corporate taxes from 1980s, and right now they're at 19%, and they're thinking about reducing it to further to 17%.
Okay.
Part of it because they want to prepare for Brexit. They believe that there will be a slowdown after Brexit, so they hope that this will be a stimulus. France, they've been having a lot of problems with their economy, so President Macron is looking to reduce the corporate taxes from 33.3% to 25%.
Wow.
But again, you have to be fairly careful with the numbers. We're talking about the central government corporate taxes, but there's a lot of difference between in various countries over whether there's surcharges or local taxes. For example, I just mentioned France, but they also have an additional 3.5% service surcharge that they charge to large companies.
Okay.
And the United States also has state and local taxes. So just going by the central government rate, it's not exactly clear.
All right. Well, what's interesting is that Japan is also considering reducing the tax burden for its businesses through incentives. So tell us more about this.
Okay. Well, Japan has lowered its rate from 42% in 2003 to currently 30%. And they're thinking about reducing the rates further to 20%, but only for those firms which actively raise wages and make a lot of investment. They're also thinking about giving tax breaks to small and medium-sized companies which are experiencing problems, and reducing estate taxes so that, well, fathers can pass their companies on to their children without paying as much taxes. Now, the problem with Japan's case is that, well, they're already running a very large government deficit and very large government debt. So it's not entirely clear whether the expansionary effect from this tax cut will be able to re-spark the Japanese economy and reduce at least their long-term debt.
Now, what impact then would Washington's latest move to, I guess, cut the corporate tax have on the Korean economy?
Okay, I don't expect there to be that much of a change.
All right.
Part of the reason is that because there's a lot of loopholes and there's a lot of tax breaks, a lot of American companies haven't really been paying 35%. So they're paying less than that rate. And also, a lot of Korean companies, well, they may position some of their companies, some of their operations in the United States. I don't think they'll move all of it. So there'll be some readjustment, rebalancing, but I don't really expect there to be that much of an effect.
Now, here at home, the government and the ruling party have been looking to raise corporate taxes for businesses. Now, how does Korea's current corporate tax rate compare to that of other countries? And the move to, I guess, raise it, how is this the right move to make?
Okay, well, the top marginal corporate tax rate in Korea, according to the new budget, will be 25%, rising from 22%, but only for those firms which make more than 300 billion won profit. Other companies will pay lower corporate tax. For companies which make less than 200 million won, it's going to be 10%, and from 20 million to 20 billion won profit, it'll be 20%, and then 22% for 20 billion to 300 billion profit.
Okay.
So only about 77 firms are going to be covered by this 25% tax increase, and the additional funds are expected to be around 2.3 trillion won additional government revenue. And now, given that the total profits for the companies which are in the Kospi stock market stock index is 121 trillion won, 2.3 trillion won of additional taxes. Well, it's not insignificant, but on the other hand, it's not a large component either. So I don't expect there to be that much of a problem with these companies. What I am worried about more is that, well, when you want to have more investment, when you want to have more jobs, it's not just the corporate tax rate which are important. It also very important what kind of business environment you have and what you do with the taxes that you got, the government expenditures. And I think we really need to pay more attention on how the government spends the government expenditure and the additional taxes that they'll receive here.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
Time now for a quick check on how the markets fared here in Seoul today. The benchmark Kospi breached the 2510 mark yet again on Tuesday after 4 trading days. At the closing bell, the Kospi ended 0.34% higher at 2510.12. The tech-heavy Kosdaq dropped 1.06% at 774.12. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean won strengthened to 1085.81 against the greenback. The Kospi opened slightly lower but quickly rebounded and surpassed the 2510 mark thanks to steel counters like POSCO, which surged 2.2%. On the other hand, major tech firms extended their recent losses on Tuesday, with market kingpin Samsung Electronics shedding 0.16%, while SK Hynix fell 1.52%. With the Korea-China summit meeting just around the corner, there are indications that diplomatic tension between the two countries is starting to cool down. Among one of the most encouraging signs is that Chinese tourists are now trickling back into Korea for the first time in almost 9 months. Our Lee Jung-hyun has more.
On Saturday, December 2nd, a group of 32 Chinese tourists entered South Korea on a package tour. Not normally remarkable, except that it was the first Chinese tour group to come to the country in almost 9 months, signaling an easing of diplomatic tensions between South Korea and China over the deployment of the U.S. missile defense system THAAD back in March.
From March, we had 0 package tour requests from China. Since about a week ago, we've got a couple of requests, but not many.
The number of Chinese tourists dropped some 61% on year, which is estimated to have cost the South Korean economy some $6.5 billion in lost revenue. That's a figure based on the average spending of Chinese visitors in 2016. While many saw the 9-month gap in group tour packages from China as a damage to the Korean tourism sector, some industry experts actually saw it as a chance for positive change.
Since 2013, China had outpaced Japan to become the main source of visitors to South Korea, but most of them were on what we call package dumping tours, which are shallow, low-quality tours at low prices.
The expert added that this year's lull has served as a time for the tourism industry overall to reflect.
We discovered a new pattern for catering to individual tourists from the existing one that relied heavily on package tours. It is time for a change in paradigm.
China's lifting of its ban on tours to South Korea is so far only partial. Package tours can only be bought over the counter in Beijing and Shandong province, and customers cannot buy any travel-related products from Lotte Group, the company that provided the land in South Korea for the missile system. The Korea Tourism Organization agrees that it's too soon to say this partial resumption of tourism will have much impact and that South Korea will have to continue to find new ways to reduce its reliance on Chinese visitors. Lee Jung-yeon, Business Daily.
Korean babies born last year are expected to have an average life expectancy of 82.4 years, according to Statistics Korea. By gender, baby boys and girls are expected to live 79.3 years and 85.4 years, respectively, which are higher than the OECD average. The gender gap in life expectancy has been steadily closing since 1985, when it peaked at 8.6 years. Korea's life expectancy for men ranked 15th, while that for women stood at 4th. Iceland had the longest male life expectancy of 81.2 years, and Japanese women are expected to live the longest at 87.1 years. Korea's smoking rate among men over the age of 19 is expected to fall this year, according to the country's health ministry. Korea's cigarette consumption is forecast to decrease from 3.6 billion cigarette packs last year to about 3.4 billion this year. Now, this is being attributed to the effects of non-price measures like graphic warning labels and the expansion of non-smoking areas. Korea's smoking rate among males fell sharply in 2015 from over 43% to less than 40% after the government raised tobacco prices by 80% in 2014. Korea's smartphone data bills are the most expensive among the world's 41 major economies. That's according to the latest Digital Fuel Monitor report released by Finnish consulting firm Rewill. The report measured the price of smartphone plans with at least 1,000 minutes of usage during November. And Korea's prices were the most expensive at nearly $16 per gigabyte of 4G smartphone data, whereas the same amount of data cost less than 50 cents in Finland. Rewill's report also highlighted Japan, Canada, and the U.S. as having excessive data prices. A Korean research institute has developed a new autonomous boat capable of sailing on its own without colliding with other vessels. In addition to maritime surveys and tracking illegal fishing boats, military applications are also being discussed for this new vessel. Our Elliot Kim reports.
These small ships are equipped with radar sensors and cameras used to detect nearby boats and plot a safe course. As soon as another ship approaches, it turns to avoid it. This particular boat is being used to track vessels suspected of illegal fishing. Named Arirang 2, the domestically developed unmanned vessel sends real-time information updates to a control center back on shore.
It uses radar to detect long-distance objects and a camera when the objects are closer. It uses a radar system combined with proximity and position sensors to navigate autonomously.
The government has been collaborating with companies on the $25 million project since 2011. Performance has significantly improved over the first-generation Arirang 1, as autonomous navigation provides safe routing, and the boats can also be remotely controlled from land. Plans are to use the ship for marine investigation, pollution control, as well as search missions for suspected illegal fishing, with the advantage of being able to go to areas deemed too dangerous for humans to navigate. The government hopes to complete performance tests and deploy the boats in the first half of next year, as well as accelerating the development of a similar vessel for military use. Elliot Kim, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today. But we'll be back tomorrow with more of the day's top business stories, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.